My name is Eleanor May, and at 78 years old, I've lived a life many would envy. For 50 years, I was the image of the perfect preacher's wife, poised, obedient, and endlessly devoted in the eyes of our quiet little town in Willow Creek, Kentucky. My dresses were always pressed, my voice always soft, and my smile never missing. I baked for every church gathering, I prayed with the sick, I taught Sunday school. I was a saint to them. But saints don't bury babies. This face that you see now, lined and worn, once hid a truth so terrible it stole the light from my eyes. These trembling hands, these same hands that once offered communion bread to the congregation, dug a grave under the apple tree behind the rectory. A grave no one ever found. That child, nameless and still, wasn't just buried in the dirt. She was buried in my silence. For 5 long decades, I lived as a ghost in my own home. Not a wife. Not a mother. Not even a woman. Just a shadow beside a man who the world revered as holy. Reverend Thomas Wren, the beloved shepherd of Willow Creek First Baptist. The man who spoke of heaven on Sundays, and created hell behind closed doors. But this isn't just a tale of pain. It's about resurrection. If you've ever lived a life where your voice didn't matter, I want you to know, there is a way out. Now before we begin, if this story touches something inside you, please consider staying with me through to the end. Your presence gives meaning to every word I've buried for so long. Take a deep breath. This story starts long, long ago, back in 1961, in a quiet corner of Carroll County, Maryland. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone's business, or thought they did. I was born Eleanor May Price, the second of 4 girls, in a creaky farmhouse tucked behind Price & Sons General Supply, the only building in town taller than the church steeple. My father, Walter Price, ran the store and the family like a war camp. A tall, rigid man with a jaw like stone and a voice that silenced dinner tables. He believed in 3 things: God, hard work, and that daughters should be silent unless spoken to. My mother, Ruth, was his mirror opposite. Sweet, soft-eyed, always folding towels or humming old hymns. She made peace with her life early and taught us girls to do the same. She used to say, "A good woman knows her place. She listens. She endures. And she smiles even when it hurts." Our house had 4 rooms and a wraparound porch with a wooden swing that groaned when the wind blew. We had peach trees out back and a wood-burning stove that never seemed to go cold, even in July. I went to school until 8th grade. I loved books. Loved them more than anything. My teacher, Miss Lillian Moore, had shelves full of them, and glasses that always slid down her nose. When she read aloud, I felt like the world outside disappeared. I wanted to be like her, a woman with knowledge and a voice. But Daddy had other plans. "You don't need school to be a wife," he said when I was 13. "You need to learn how to cook, clean, and pray. That's what makes a good woman." And just like that, I was pulled from school. My dreams folded away with my old textbooks. At 15, I met Thomas Wren, a new preacher from out of town, barely 22, with fiery sermons and a grin that made the church ladies blush. He said I had the spirit of a godly woman. He asked to court me 2 weeks later. Mama said he was a gift from the Lord. I said yes. At 16, I married him. I wore a borrowed white dress and said my vows under the cross. Everyone clapped and cried, but no one heard the screams behind the parsonage walls. The first night, after the guests had gone and the cake had dried on the plates, he turned the key in the bedroom door. He said marriage was obedience made holy. Then he hit me. And that was just the beginning. The morning after, he kissed my forehead like nothing had happened. Made eggs and bacon. Said grace. Smiled at me across the table, like we were a Hallmark couple. My hands shook as I held the fork. "You'll learn, Eleanor," he said, sipping his coffee. "You'll be better than them all." I didn't ask who them meant. I just nodded. The bruises didn't show. He was careful. Always careful. The man who stood at the pulpit every Sunday, preaching about mercy, about love, about family. He never left a mark that would need explaining. He didn't need to. His words were sharper than his hands. He'd whisper them like prayers. "You belong to me. God gave you to me for a reason. I'm saving you from your sinful nature." I began to believe him. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother. Not Dorothy. Not even God, though I tried. I knelt by the bed every night and folded my hands until they cramped, but no words would come. What was I supposed to say? That I was afraid of my husband? That the man who baptized children and held the hands of the dying had a voice like ice when no one was around? There was no one to tell. The whole town adored him. Women brought him pies. Men asked for his blessing before hunting season. Children drew him pictures and called him Father Gray. Even though Baptists weren't supposed to. And I smiled beside him. Always smiling. Always silent. My days became a liturgy of fear. Breakfast. Clean. Pray. Bake. Host women's Bible study. Nod. Pretend. Serve. Be ready. He wanted everything in place by the time he came home. Warm food, clean floors, soft voice, lowered eyes. If I failed, if I forgot to iron his collar, or if dinner was too salty, he'd make me kneel on rice. On tile. In the dark. Sometimes for an hour. Sometimes 2. It was discipline, he said. Correction in love. I once tried to ask him why love felt like punishment. He didn't answer. He just took my Bible, tore out the Song of Solomon and said, "You don't deserve this until you obey." I stopped asking questions. I stopped thinking at all. The only time I felt alive was when I stepped outside alone to hang the laundry. The smell of fresh cotton. The feel of grass under bare feet. The wind brushing my cheek like a kindness I didn't earn. I would look at the sky and wonder if God could see me. And if he did, why didn't he do anything? One afternoon, maybe 6 months into the marriage, I walked into town to buy flour. I took the long way, past the cemetery, where the trees grew thick and the air smelled like moss and damp stone. I found myself standing in front of a tiny grave. It was covered in weeds. The name had faded from the headstone. A child no more than a few years old. I knelt. I didn't cry. I just stared. Something in my chest loosened. It felt familiar. When I came home that day, Thomas was waiting. His jaw was tight. "Where were you?" "The store was out of flour." I lied. "I had to go to the next one." He stepped forward. "You didn't tell me." "I didn't think." "You don't think. That's the problem." He grabbed my wrist. Hard. Then let go. Smiled. "Maybe I need to pray for your memory." That night he didn't speak to me. He just paced the living room, whispering scripture to himself. Over and over. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling, too afraid to move. The next morning, there was a lock on the front door. Inside. One I couldn't reach without a key. "It's for your safety," he said. I never saw the town alone again. By the time I turned 17, I was pregnant. He was elated. "A new prophet," he said. "Born into righteousness." But I didn't feel righteous. I felt like a cracked vessel trying to hold something precious. I was sick all day. Couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. My hands trembled when I picked up the Bible, like it knew I wasn't worthy. I prayed for strength. I prayed for mercy. And one night, after a particularly violent outburst, he accused me of dishonoring his name, because I forgot to sew a loose button. I woke up bleeding. The pain hit me like a knife from the inside out. I crawled to the bathroom, curled on the cold floor. When I told him, he didn't even sit down. Just stared at me and said, "It's because you weren't obedient." That was it. No doctor. No priest. No burial. We never spoke of it again. Except once, months later, when he was drunk on communion wine, something he never did in public, and he slurred, "God took it. Just like he'll take you if you keep testing me." He never got drunk again. But he didn't have to, because something inside me had already died. Again after Bible study, I looked her in the eyes, held her gaze longer than I was ever allowed to. She didn't look away this time. She reached into her purse and handed me a paper. I unfolded it that night under candlelight. It was blank, but tucked inside was something more important. A key. I didn't sleep that night. I kept the key under my pillow, touching it like a rosary every time my breath caught in my throat. I didn't know what it opened, but it was real, cold, heavy, something outside of him, something I could control. That was new. The next morning, Thomas went into town to visit the sheriff. Said there'd been boys vandalizing the cemetery. I nodded and waved goodbye from the porch like a dutiful wife. The moment his car disappeared, I ran to the church. The key fit the side door. Not the main one. A tiny iron door near the storage shed, where the grass grew thick and wild. I'd never been through it before. Inside was a narrow stone staircase. Cold air spilled out like a sigh. I lit a candle from my coat pocket and stepped down. It smelled of mildew and rust. The walls sweated. The silence hummed. I reached the bottom. It was a cellar. No, more like a vault. Thick concrete walls, metal shelves and crates. Dozens of crates. Most unmarked. Some labeled in faint chalk. Choir robes, seasonal decor, donations. But there was one box in the back. A small wooden chest with my name carved into it. Eleanor, not etched gently, but scratched with something sharp. Angry. Frantic. My heart slammed against my ribs. I opened it. Inside were pages. Dozens of them. Journal entries. Letters. But none were in my handwriting. The first page read, "If you're reading this, it means he hasn't killed you yet. You're not alone. My name was Ruth." He said God sent me. But God never wanted this. I sat down on the cold floor and read every word. There were 7 letters. All from women. All written years apart. Each told a story like mine: charm, then control. Pain, then silence. One woman had fled in the middle of the night and never returned. Another said she tried to go to the sheriff, but he was Thomas's cousin. The third wrote of her baby, stillborn, buried under the rose bush. Her name was Lydia, too. That's when I screamed. A sound burst out of me, loud and raw, so sharp it cracked through the stone like a bell. The candle fell. I collapsed beside the box, clutching the letters, sobbing. Lydia. It wasn't a name I'd chosen randomly. It was a name he'd whispered in his sleep. I stayed there for hours, rocking, reading, rereading. By the time I emerged, the sun was setting. I walked out of the church through the front door for the first time in 2 years. The wind felt different. That night, I didn't go home. I went to Naomi's. She opened the door without a word, pulled me inside, and locked it behind me. Her house smelled of lavender and old books. She led me into a room lined with photographs of women-children gatherings. But some photos were turned backward, their faces hidden. She poured me tea. We sat at the table in silence. She reached across, held my hand. "You found the vault?" she asked softly. I nodded. She exhaled, like she'd been holding it for years. "I was his first," she said. "I was 16. He wasn't even ordained yet." My hand tightened around hers. I tried to tell people. I tried to scream. But no one wanted to listen. And the ones who did, they were too afraid. "He buried my baby behind the chapel. Told everyone I miscarried because I had an affair." She paused. I believed it. For years. She stood up, went to a drawer, and pulled out a stack of old photographs. Each one showed a young woman standing outside the church. Some with babies. Some with shadows under their eyes. All silent. "They all lived here, Eleanor," Naomi said. "For a time. What happened to them?" I whispered. "Some ran. Some disappeared. And some," she looked down. "He made sure they didn't come back." I stayed with Naomi that night. She gave me her guest bed and a worn flannel nightgown. I didn't sleep. I just stared at the ceiling and listened to the sound of her clock ticking, steady and slow, like a countdown. In the morning, I knew what I had to do. I wrote a letter. Just like the others. I put it in the box with Ruth's, with the others. I added a name. Anna Eleanor Gray. I added my daughter's full name, too. Lydia Ruth Gray. I went back to the grave behind the apple tree, dug with my bare hands until I hit wood. I placed a small cross there. Just sticks tied with thread. It wasn't much. But it was hers. That Sunday, I walked into the church during service. I wore white. The room froze. Thomas looked up from the pulpit and faltered for the first time in years. His voice broke mid-sermon. I walked down the center aisle and sat in the front pew. Alone. He continued preaching, but his words stuttered. Twisted. His hands trembled. After service, people came up to me. Some stared. Some whispered. But 2 women, older now, quieter, stood beside me without speaking. Naomi joined them. We didn't say it out loud. We didn't need to. Something had begun. That night, Thomas came home in a fury. "Where were you?" he shouted. "In church," I said calmly. "You embarrassed me. You embarrassed yourself." His hand shot out, but I didn't flinch. He paused. Confused. I stepped forward, my voice steady. "I know about the vault." His face drained of color. "I know about the letters. About Ruth. About Naomi. About all of them." Silence. "And I know about Lydia." He lunged for me. But Naomi had already called the sheriff. Not his cousin. A new one. A younger man. Someone from outside the county. They were waiting outside. The handcuffs clicked. Thomas screamed about judgment. About Satan. About trials and tests. But no one listened. Not anymore. The church was empty for a while after that. People were ashamed. Quiet. Unsure. But over time it reopened. With new leadership. New breath. They planted a tree behind the chapel. For the children. They called it the Tree of Lydia. The house was quiet after they took him. Too quiet. I wandered through the rooms like a ghost. Touching the walls, opening old drawers. Looking for something, maybe a trace of who I used to be. The bedroom smelled of mothballs and guilt. The study still had his books in neat rows, each spine unbroken, each title louder than his sermons. I boxed them up, donated them to a library 2 towns over. I found the prayer journal he'd made me keep. I almost burned it. But something made me read it instead. Entry after entry of hollow praise and pretend gratitude. Except one. Near the end, in faint pencil, barely legible under his red pen markings, I had written, "I do not belong to him. I do not belong to this house. I belong to her. I belong to Lydia." I tore that page out and kept it. Framed it later. Naomi visited every week. She brought tea, sometimes soup. She never pitied me. Never forced words. She just sat in the kitchen with me, letting the silence feel human again. Others came too. Ruth's sister. The choir girl. Her name was Emily, and she was alive, married, with 3 children now. She had left when she was 17 and never looked back. She cried when she saw me. "I thought you were dead," she whispered. "I was," I said. The trial was short. He pled insanity, claimed visions, that God had tested him, that women were vessels and obedience was holy. No one believed him anymore. Especially not the jury. He was sentenced to life in a psychiatric facility. The courtroom didn't cheer. It just breathed. I never visited him. But one day, I got a letter. Just my name, scrawled in crooked ink on the envelope. No return address. Inside was a torn page from a hymnal. Written across it, "Even the serpent wears white when he wants to be worshipped." No apology. No remorse. Just scripture twisted into poison. I burned it. Years passed. I planted herbs behind the house. Repainted the kitchen. Let the breeze in without fear. I sang while I cooked. Quiet songs at first, then louder ones. I bought a cat. Named her Unia. I started volunteering at a shelter for young women. Runaways. Silent ones. They didn't need advice. They needed to know someone had survived. So I told them pieces of my story. The parts they could hold. The parts that wouldn't break them. I never said his name. Only Lydia's. Always Lydia's. Then came the day. It was raining again. Naomi called me, voice shaking. "Anna. He's dead." He'd been found unresponsive in his bed at the hospital. Stroke. No next of kin. No mourners. They asked if I wanted the body. I said no. But I asked for one thing. His Bible. They mailed it. When it arrived, I didn't touch it at first. Just stared at the worn leather cover. I knew every mark on it. Every scuff. Every lie. But when I opened it, something fell out. A photo. A grainy, faded image of a woman I didn't recognize, blonde young, standing in front of a farmhouse. Written on the back. Miriam. 1955, the first. My heart stopped. 1955 was before Naomi. Before the church. Before Maryland. There was more. Tucked inside the cover was a folded map. A single red X near a town in Pennsylvania. And a note, barely legible. She told. I made it right. Never again. I took it to Naomi. She stared at it for a long time. "Do you think?" "I think there are more graves," I said. We contacted authorities. They excavated the land months later. They found remains. A child. A woman. No headstones. No names. But I gave one. I whispered it to the wind. Miriam. People started calling me brave. A survivor. A symbol. I don't feel like any of those things. I feel tired. But I also feel full. Full of voices that were silenced. Full of hands that never got to bury their children. Full of names never spoken. I'm 78 now. Sometimes I sit on my porch with Unia and think about what it means to be alive. I still visit Lydia's tree. It blooms earlier than all the others. I leave her notes. I wore white today. They sang your name in Sunday school. I'm sorry it took so long. Sometimes I just sit in the grass and hum. Sometimes I think I hear her in the wind. If you've made it this far, thank you. This story wasn't meant for fame. It was meant for remembrance. For warning. Because monsters don't always hide in forests or shadows. Sometimes they wear robes. Sometimes they preach. Sometimes they marry you. But if you're quiet, too quiet for too long, your voice becomes something sharp. And one day you pick it up. And you speak. I never really talked about my parents. Not to anyone. Not even to Naomi. But after everything, after Thomas, after the vault, I needed to understand where I came from. How pain passed from one generation to the next. My mother, Evelyn, was nothing like me. She was fragile, physically and emotionally. Soft-spoken, always hesitant, always looking for approval from my father, Richard. Richard was the kind of man who filled a room without speaking, the kind who could silence a crowd just by raising an eyebrow. Tall, dark-haired, a businessman who owned the town's only bank. Evelyn was born in a nearby town. Her mother died when she was young, and her father remarried quickly. Evelyn never spoke of her stepmother, but I suspect she never found peace in that household. When Evelyn met Richard, she thought she had found safety. But safety, like everything else in our family, was a fragile illusion. Richard expected obedience. Not just from Evelyn, but from me too when I was little. My earliest memories are of his shadow looming over the dinner table, his voice low but threatening. Girls don't need to speak unless spoken to. He was strict, cold. He ruled the family with an iron will, but unlike Thomas, he kept his cruelty quiet, behind closed doors, beneath his well-tailored suits. I remember once breaking a vase in the living room. It was an accident, but Richard's punishment was harsh. He didn't hit me. No, his punishment was worse. He told Evelyn to take me out of school. Said I was too delicate for education. Evelyn obeyed. She was a prisoner too. When I was 16, Evelyn passed away. A sudden illness. Pneumonia, they said. But I always wondered if it was something more. Something broken inside. Before she died, she took my hand and whispered, "Don't be like me, Anna. Don't lose your voice." Those words haunted me. I promised her. Richard never mourned publicly. Instead, he remarried 6 months later. His new wife, Martha, was the complete opposite of Evelyn. She was loud, bold, and had a sharp tongue. She didn't like me. I could feel it every time she looked my way. She tried to control everything. My clothes, my friends, even the way I walked. I started sneaking out at night, wandering the streets, looking for anything that wasn't silence. It was during those nights I met Thomas. He was different from anyone I'd ever known. Charismatic, kind, with eyes that seemed to look straight into your soul. He made me laugh. He made me feel alive. But it didn't last. After we married, the mask slipped. The charming man was replaced by someone I barely recognized. The man who preached love and forgiveness at church was the same man who shattered my world behind closed doors. I started to understand the cycle. How my father's coldness had shaped Thomas's cruelty. How Evelyn's silence had passed down to me. But this time, I refused to be silent. My mother's name was Evelyn. She was a delicate woman, whose soft voice and gentle hands seemed almost too fragile for the harsh world she inhabited. I only learned bits and pieces about her as I grew older, because neither she nor my father ever spoke of their pasts openly. That silence wrapped around our family like a heavy shroud. Evelyn grew up in a small town nearby, a place where everyone knew each other's names and secrets. Her mother died when she was just a child, leaving behind a cold father who quickly remarried. Evelyn never spoke much about her stepmother, but the few times she mentioned her, her voice would falter, and a sadness would shadow her eyes. She was nothing like my mother, she once told me quietly, her gaze distant. She didn't love me. Not like a mother should. I could feel the weight of that unloved childhood, even when I was young. It explained so much. The way Evelyn flinched at loud noises, how she always wore long sleeves even in summer, hiding scars I never asked about. When Evelyn met my father, Richard, she must have hoped for a new beginning. Richard was the town's banker, a man with sharp eyes and a firm jaw, whose presence could fill a room without him saying a word. Tall and impeccably dressed, he carried himself like a man used to being obeyed. I never liked him much. His smile never reached his eyes. His voice was calm, but carried an edge that made everyone listen carefully. At home, Richard ruled with quiet authority. His discipline was strict but subtle. No yelling, no breaking things, but an unspoken rule that you must always be perfect, always be silent, always be small. I remember sitting at the dinner table, the silverware cold in my hands, trying not to meet his gaze. If I spoke out of turn, his look was enough to stop me. "Girls don't need to speak unless spoken to," he said once, and those words stuck with me like chains. My mother, Evelyn, was a different kind of prisoner. She obeyed Richard without question, her head bowed, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She tried to shield me from his harshness, but the fear in her eyes was unmistakable. When I was 10, I accidentally knocked over a vase in the living room. It shattered into 100 pieces on the hardwood floor. I expected a punishment, but nothing prepared me for Richard's cold reaction. He didn't raise his voice or hand. Instead, he told my mother I was too delicate for school. From that day on, my lessons stopped. He said education was a luxury for boys, not girls. Your place is at home, he said. Learning will only make you unhappy. My dreams of becoming a teacher, inspired by my beloved Mrs. Davies, who showed me the magic in books and chalk, began to wither in that moment. Evelyn never argued. She looked at me with sad eyes and told me to obey. But inside me, a spark was lit. A quiet rebellion that no one could see. When I was 16, Evelyn fell ill. It was sudden. One morning she was warm and laughing. The next she was cold and quiet. They said it was pneumonia. But I always suspected it was more than that. More than the illness. More than the fever. I think her heart broke long before the doctor said it would. She called me to her bedside, her voice barely a whisper. Anna, she said, clutching my hand tightly. Don't be like me. Don't lose your voice. Those words echoed in my mind for years. I promised her silently that I wouldn't. Richard never showed grief. No tears. No funeral speeches. Instead, he remarried 6 months later. His new wife, Martha, was the opposite of Evelyn. Loud, sharp-tongued, and unforgiving. She didn't like me. From the moment she arrived, I was an intruder. She criticized everything, my clothes, my friends, the way I spoke. I retreated into myself. But at night, when Martha was asleep, I'd sneak out into the quiet streets, searching for something I couldn't name. It was during one of these nights that I met Thomas. He was different from anyone I'd known. Charismatic, kind, with a smile that felt like a secret. He listened. He laughed. He made me feel alive. For a while, I believed in the future we might have together. But after we married, the mask slipped. The man who preached love and forgiveness became someone else entirely behind closed doors. The kind, gentle Thomas was replaced by a man who was cruel and violent. The sermons about compassion were lies. The prayers whispered in church hid screams that never reached the walls. I began to understand the dark cycle I was trapped in. How my father's coldness had seeded the bitterness in Thomas. How my mother's silence had passed to me. But this time, I refused to be quiet. Years passed. The weight of secrets grew heavier. And one day, when no one was watching, I found my voice again. The days after the wedding were like a beautiful dream painted with soft colors and whispered promises. Thomas was attentive, kind, his hands gentle when they brushed mine. For the first time in years, I felt hope. Hope that love could be more than just words spoken in a church sermon. But as the weeks passed, the softness began to fade. It started with small things. A look that lingered too long, a word said too sharply. Then came the silences. Heavy, suffocating silences that filled the rooms like a thick fog. One evening, after dinner, I hesitated before mentioning a childhood memory. Something light, something harmless. Thomas's smile vanished. He fixed me with a cold stare. Why dredge up the past, he said quietly, but with an edge sharp enough to cut. I swallowed my fear and tried to explain, but his eyes told me to stop. The man I had fallen in love with was retreating. The church was our public stage. Outside, he was the devoted preacher, the perfect husband. Inside, behind closed doors, a different Thomas ruled. His voice, once warm, turned cold and harsh. His hands, once gentle, now clenched into fists. The sermons on Sunday contrasted painfully with the nights I spent trembling in the darkness. I kept the bruises hidden. Behind high collars, long sleeves. Behind polite smiles. But each secret hurt chipped away at my soul. I tried to tell my mother-in-law once. She was a kind woman, with eyes full of sympathy and hands that always smelled of fresh bread. I thought she might understand. But when I whispered my pain, her expression hardened. Thomas loves the Lord, she said firmly. He would never harm you. I learned then that love, in that family, was measured by silence and obedience. The years passed. The children came. Each birth a blessing and a curse. Thomas's love seemed to grow colder with every child. His sermons became longer. His temper shorter. The house that once echoed with laughter grew quiet. Too quiet. I found solace in small things. Gardening. Praying. Writing secret letters to a friend I never sent. I clung to memories of my mother's words. Don't lose your voice. But silence was easier. Safer. Until one night. The night that changed everything. It was late. The children were asleep. Thomas had been drinking, his steps heavy in the hallway. I tried to stay calm, but when he came into the room, eyes wild, voice slurred, everything inside me screamed to run. He grabbed me. I struggled, but his strength was overwhelming. That night, I buried more than pain. I buried my screams, my hope, myself. The next morning he was gone. The house was silent again. But I knew the nightmare had only begun. I kept the secret for years. Years of silent tears. Years of hidden wounds. Until the day I found Lydia. It was early spring when Lydia appeared in our lives. She was a quiet girl from the neighboring town, new to our church community. Her family had fallen on hard times, and she came seeking refuge, or maybe just a fresh start. Thomas took an immediate interest in her. At first, it seemed innocent, a helping hand, a guiding presence. But I felt a chill whenever she was around him. There was something in her eyes that mirrored the fear I once carried. One afternoon, I found Lydia sitting alone in the church garden, tears streaming down her face. I approached gently. "Are you all right?" I asked. She looked up, startled, then nodded quickly. But I saw the tremble in her hands. Days later, I overheard a whispered conversation between Thomas and Lydia in the church basement. His voice was low, urgent. "I told you to keep quiet," he hissed. Her sobs echoed in the empty room. I wanted to rush in, to save her. But I was frozen, trapped by years of silence and fear. That night, I could not sleep. My mind raced with memories, the bruises, the broken promises, the lies. I realized then that Lydia was not just a girl in need. She was a living reminder of the darkness I had buried deep inside myself. The next morning, I confronted Thomas. His eyes blazed with anger. "How dare you interfere," he spat. "I protect this family." But I saw through the facade. I saw the monster beneath. It was then that I decided to fight, to break the cycle, to find my voice and use it. The days that followed were a blur of whispered plans and secret meetings. I reached out to Naomi, my only true friend. Together, we crafted a plan to help Lydia escape Thomas's grasp. But Thomas was cunning. He sensed the threat. One night, he cornered me in the hallway. "You'll regret this," he warned. But I no longer feared him. I had found strength in my silence. The final confrontation came unexpectedly. In the dark of night, Lydia fled. Thomas chased her through the cold streets. But she was faster. She disappeared into the forest beyond the town. I never saw Lydia again. But the fear lingered. The silence threatened to consume me once more. Until the day the police arrived. A child's body had been found buried in our backyard. The world shattered. Thomas was arrested. The secrets of years spilled out like poison. And I, Anna, finally found the courage to speak. To tell the world the truth behind the perfect facade. There is a voice waiting to be found. Thank you for listening. Today, looking back, I no longer deny the scars. Instead, I've learned to see beauty in them, because each one taught me how to resist. And more than that, how to love without losing myself. My story has come to an end, but so many others remain untold, locked away in silence. Your voice holds power. Your story matters. Please share a part of it in the comments below. Not for me, but for the person reading who feels alone. Let them know they are not alone. If this story has touched you, please like and subscribe. Together, we can turn a whisper into a chorus that can no longer be ignored.